What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Couple things to talk about today, including sales in Japan that surprised me a little bit, seeing as how apparently the Switch topped the sales charts over Japan despite Dragon Quest XI being out for the 3DS and the PS4, but there might be an issue Nintendo may have to face sooner than later when it comes to Switch production. So let's get started. Now, I told you Dragon Quest XI, of course, is still rolling along in Japan. They did still top the game charts like we would assume because, well, Dragon Quest XI and Japan, it's going to sell well, obviously. And here's the charts here. We still have the 3DS version, yes, sitting at the top, as we'd expect, since there are more 3DSs than PS4s. 307,000 this week. Right underneath that, the PS4 version, 200,000. Splatoon 2 is still right there at third place, 74,000. Phoenix Wright, brand new this week, and Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy rounding out the top 5. This does give Dragon Quest XI almost 1.5 million units sold on the 3DS, and very close to 1.2 million units sold on the PS4 in its first, week or so? That's pretty good. I mean, I'm not surprised. It's Dragon Quest XI. Come on, we know it's going to sell in Japan. It'll be more interesting to see what happens when it comes over to the stateside, anywhere else in the world where it's maybe less popular than it is in Japan. It certainly won't get those kind of numbers outside of Japan, but it's good to see that their market is buying it like crazy. Now let's jump down to the more surprising part of the Media Creates charts, and that is the system sales in particular, which you'll see here with the Nintendo Switch actually taking the first spot even over the 3DS, which is very odd considering, well, Dragon Quest XI is out. You figured since last week it did 142,000, it would probably around that same amount, right? Even the PS4 you'd assume would be above the Switch, although based on different charts last week, the Switch apparently still outsold the PS4 last week, if you look at like Famitsu compared to Media Creates. But I'm going to stick with Media Creates going forward just to keep consistency. Anyway, Nintendo Switch, 61,933. That is down, though, from the 89,314 from the week prior. The 3DS was significantly down from the last week. That could be from supply based on the amount bought the previous week. Maybe people just bought so many of them they had a hard time restocking. PS4, 52,939. That was also down from that massive burst, obviously, from Dragon Quest XI, and the PlayStation Vita still sitting close to the 5,000 mark. The Xbox One is down 4 units, down to 90. They were so close to that 100 mark, but maybe next week. So it does still seem that the Switch just sells out whenever it comes in. I have a feeling that was pretty much all the units on hand, give or take a few that maybe get lost in the retail spaces at different stores that maybe are kind of passed over. For the most part, though, Switches go to Japan, they sell out. You know, we have those lotteries that we see massive lines, thousands of people in line, so the Switch is still supply constraint just from demand. Like, they put them in, they get purchased right away. So I'm going to be very curious to see what happens when maybe the demand is not as high, although I don't know when that'll be for the Switch, because it seems like no matter what Splatoon 2 is showing right now, it just sells out. It's going to be very interesting when the MPDs come out in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and we can see, well, did Splatoon 2 and that massive burst of Switch stock that we saw in Japan, was that the same in the United States? And did the stateside, did we really bring a lot of Switches out and give them a big month? We're going to see because, of course, well, the PS4 always does well here in the MPDs, but it's going to be interesting when they had a very powerful seller like Splatoon 2 on the market to see if that helped, one, sell through systems, and two, sell through Splatoon 2. I'll be curious to see where that tops the MPD at. Now let's talk about where Nintendo may run into some issues here, and this is kind of interesting. So, of course, Nintendo sources different companies for different parts in their devices. In this case, the Switch, of course, they use places like Toshiba and Samsung for their NAND memory, for example. In this case, they have a company called JDI that creates their LCDs for them for the system. Now here's the big issue right now. JPI seems to be in some financial trouble. Now they haven't been doing well for the past 4 years anyway, mostly in their words because Apple, who was a massive backer for them, they made up over 50% of their revenue for the past really years before that even. Well, Apple has been making this move from LCD to OLED screens, right? OLED, that is becoming very popular in cell phones, as we see with places like Samsung. In fact, it was so bad, they just reported a net loss of $286 million. Not even yet, dollars. $286 million. That is a massive amount. Now, Nintendo makes up a very small amount of their revenue, as they've said, because Nintendo uses, in their words, cheaper screens compared to what go into the, like we're talking like the massive resolution ones, right? We're talking about like what some phone screens have like 1440p resolution, whereas the Switch is a 720p screen. That's not really a knock on the quality of the screen. They're just saying it's cheaper to produce those screens, and that's fine. But the fact that, how many Apple iPhones go out every year that they were responsible for those screens, and not as much now. So they're going to have some issues. They're already slashing massive amounts of jobs, laying off tons of people, over 3,000 jobs this year. They're laying people off. And that kind of becomes a problem because now people are concerned. What happens if JPI has so many issues that they can't produce screens for Nintendo anymore? One, I don't think that'll actually happen because, in their words, they've made some bad business decisions and they haven't organized their organization very well, according to them. And they think by doing things like budget cuts, layoffs, and really just start cutting expenses, that they can kind of right the ship. They're also looking for investors outside Japan at this point. They've mostly kept it domestic. They're looking outside of Japan now for investors and partners that can kind of bring in some capital and help them stay afloat. I also think Nintendo could find other companies to make these LCDs. I don't think they're locked in the JPI. It's not like JPI is the sole provider of LCDs. Nintendo could probably find other places, and if worst case scenario they can't use LCDs, maybe we see a revision in a year or two that is an OLED screen. Would you like an OLED screen in your device with your Switch? Let me know. I'm curious if that would be a revision you would love to see, or you're fine with the LCD screen. I'm fine with the LCD screen, and it really is not that big of a deal to me. I have seen OLED, obviously, and yes, it's a nice looking screen, but there are issues with things like burn-in, stuff like that. I don't know, it'd be interesting to see, but right now, the Switch's screen, it's fine. And if Capcom could not mess up any further with the Mega Man Legacy Collection 2, not only did they not put it on Nintendo's Switch unit, which I will never understand why it's not on the Switch. I understand maybe they had this planned out a while ago, and they're like, oh, it's built from the ground up, so, it'd take a little while to port it and everything. Fine. But, well, a little bit of a blow happened to that statement and that idea that it is built from the ground up, considering, well, there's a screen that was left in that tells me maybe it's really either not thought out well or it's emulated, and that's what a lot of people are getting concerned about because it was eventually found out that the Mega Man Legacy Collection 1 was not really built from the ground up. They left in the licensed by Nintendo screen in Mega Man 7 that you would find when you first turn it on. Now, what gets me is, as far as I remember, and I double-checked, that screen is not present on the PS2 version of the Mega Man collection that was out a long time ago. It just skips right by that screen. It just doesn't exist. So it's very odd that all of a sudden it exists in the newer Collection 2. Not really sure what's going on there, why it's in the Mega Man Legacy Collection 2. It's just, I guess, Capcom being Capcom. People have said, well, they're being lazy. Probably. It's hard to say. It's really funny considering they left that line in when it's not needed to be there, and it's on every platform but Nintendo's. So, that's Capcom, I guess. What can you say? And it turns out that Eurogamer somehow got documents that talk about the PlayStation 4's Firmware 5.0 that's coming up. They told us a month ago that it existed, that it's coming, and that people will be beta testing it this month in August, right? Great. Well, a lot of the features that apparently are coming, well, they're kind of underwhelming. A lot of people really, really want super sampling as an option across the board for the PS4 Pro. That being, it will render a larger image, like 1440p, but then it will shrink it down to the 1080p screen that you see, and that does a few things. The biggest thing, though, is it kind of gives a nice side effect of really aliasing being eliminated around sharp edges or just objects in general, so they look a little softer and look better on your screen. The Xbox One X is going to do that for every game, apparently. So a lot of us figured, well, that's going to happen for the PS4 Pro. We're going to get super sampling across the board. Not the case. The biggest feature that they are touting here is that if you have a PS4 Pro, you can now stream at 1080p 60 frames on Twitch, which to most of us is not a big deal, considering a lot of us use computers to stream. A lot of people, I assume, don't use the PS4 native app for streaming, although I'm sure some people do. But really, if you've bought a PS4 Pro, you probably also have a computer next to it that can stream out. So, sure, I guess it's a feature. It's just not something that a lot of us wanted. I think if we had the choice, okay, can we stream from the PS4 1080p 60 through its native app? through Twitch, or would you like super sampling? We all want super sampling, so come on, Sony, make that happen. Either way, no actual date on the new firmware coming out. We just know, well, they're going to be beta testing it this month, and we assume some point later on this month, maybe early September, we will see an actual rollout of PlayStation 4's firmware 5.0, but I'm less interested now, unfortunately. And keeping what seems to be like indie tradition, well, the developers of Super Meat Boy decided to announce the Switch's version on Twitter. Have you seen that recently, that a lot of indie developers are just like posting up on Twitter, hey look, here's me playing the game on the Switch, or here's me developing, here's the title screen on the Switch. I'm starting to see that a lot, right? Well, they posted Twitter simply saying, oh, by the way, with a picture of Super Meat Boy on the Switch. So while we have had it hinted to us a lot, it looks like it is officially coming to the Switch. And sure, a lot of people are probably going to break their Switches over this game, but it's Super Meat Boy. It's supposed to be frustrating, it's supposed to be fun, and it's supposed to be, at the biggest part, unforgivable. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about the new Hellblade game that came out. Very popular game for a lot of people who are streaming, and it's honestly, at the cost, it's pretty good. I think it's like $30, and on PC, it looks amazing. On the PS4, it looks good as well. Maybe the PS4's best looking game graphically, but the big thing is, there was this interesting set of dialogue in the beginning of the game that may have set a lot of people in the review world, the news world, pretty much games in general, kind of off on a red herring. So let me explain. In the beginning, it kind of tells you, or at least alludes to the fact that if you die too much, your game is just going to be erased. Simply erased as a form of permadeath, start over, and hopefully don't die as much this time. And in fact, because of that text in the beginning, a lot of people who were reviewing it early or had early copies started to think that, wow, this will erase my game if I die too much. None of them really tried it, at least until one place, PC Games N, decided to test the theory and start dying constantly. Like, we're talking like 50, 60, 70 times. But their save was never deleted. They never got to that point. It seemed to almost taunt them with the idea, but never actually did it. Unfortunately, that came a little too late, as people online freaked out, assuming that, of course, before testing it themselves, and it went everywhere. For some reason, I looked at M4G one day, and that was the top thing, permadeath in Hellblade, and people were freaking out about it. They're like, this is the worst thing ever, this is terrible, and other people were like, well, get good at the game, obviously, right? In this case, though, it wasn't true. It was one of those things to me that I look on the internet and say, well, that's an internet hoax, I guess. Fortunately, some of the reviewers I watched did not fall for it. Others seem to, though. But that's the way it goes, I guess. At least we know now, through really just testing, that's not the case. It was just a bluff on their part. And ladies and gentlemen, that's it for Newswave today. Make sure you comment, like, and subscribe. All of that good stuff. Let me think about any of the stuff we talked about today, whether it is the media create sales. Are you surprised that the Switch is at number one with the supply constraint that's going on? They still managed to outsell their own 3DS, Nintendo's, and the PS4, while Dragon Quest XI is going massively strong in Japan. I mean, that's really got to be PS4's big trump card in Japan, but the PS4 still can't seem to outsell a supplied Switch. I say supplied, but really, it's selling out. They need more Switches in Japan. I think that's obvious. They need more Switches everywhere at this point. Also, when you think about the Capcom leaving licensed by Nintendo in the Mega Man Legacy Collection 2, is that funny? Is that dumb? Or is it just Capcom being Capcom? And also, were you fooled by the Hellblade permadeath situation? If you were, not a big deal. I'm just curious if you've also played the game and if you enjoy it. That's it for now. I'll see you guys next time.